But wait though, a lot of people do ask me, Ella Pinky, why do you always talk about religion? Why do you always talk about the Bible God? Why do you always talk about colonization? That is because I don't think colonization only took our land. That is because colonization changed the way Africans think. Imagine someone comes to your house, takes your valuables, change your name, tell you that your parents were wrong, tell you that your family traditions are evil, introduce their own way of life to you, and after so many generations your children believes that that stranger's way of life is their own. Would you still consider that thing as your own culture? That is the question I want Africans to ask. Before Europeans arrived, Africans had their own way of belief. They had their kings and queens, they had their own language, they had their own medicine, they had their own spirituality, they had the way they understand life. We did not need the Europeans to tell us how to live. Then colonization happened. Europeans introduced their religion, their language, their educational system, and many more of their customs. And before you know it, Africans began to see the Europeans' way of life as civilized and then their own traditions as primitive. Now ask yourself this: why is it easy for a child to know the characters in a Bible, but that child does not know the history of their own ancestors? Why were we taught to be proud of another person's history while forgetting our own? Some people will say, if the Europeans did not colonize us, how are we going to be able to communicate easily? English help us to communicate better. My answer is simple: Africans will always find a way. Human beings adapt. Europe was not born speaking one language. In Europe, they speak English, they speak German, they speak Spanish, they speak a lot of language. They do not need to erase their own language in order to communicate with each other. Over time, Africans were taught that the belief of their ancestors were evil. They were taught that their deities were demons. They were taught that Ekwensu means Satan, and their traditions were backward, and that everything that the Europeans brought were more civilized. Ask yourself these questions. If our ancestors could survive thousands of years before Christianity, will they be considered automatically evil because they did not know the Bible? Africa is now one of the most biggest religious continents in the world. Every street has a church. Every neighborhood has a mosque. In fact, people now argue about whose pastor performs the highest and biggest miracle. People now celebrate who has the biggest church. Ask yourself this: have being the most religious helped us being the most developed country or continent? No, think about this. The Europeans came into Africa. They took our oils, they took our crude oil, they took our diamond, they took our gold, they took many of our natural resources, but yet they told Africans that they should focus more on building their possession in heaven than building prosperity here on earth. They told Africans that heaven is up and hell is down, but they are digging down and taking our resources. Ask yourself, if there is actually a place called heaven, where there are gold and diamonds, why didn't these Europeans, why didn't they go to that heaven and take those resources from there? But they're telling you that when you die, it's when you will enjoy your heavenly possessions. Is that not crazy? It's high time we wake up from this mental slavery. Now ask yourself this question: if religion brings national prosperity, why do many religion-believing African countries still suffer unemployment, failed infrastructure, sickness, a lot of things? Instead of asking hard questions to your leaders, you are told to pray harder. Instead of studying your history, you are told not to ask questions because your God is an unquestionable God and is going to buy you if you ask questions. Slavery destroyed families. Families were torn apart. Husbands lost their wives, they lost their children, they lost a lot of things. Women were abused, children were sold. This is not an invitation to hate Christians or Muslims. It is an invitation to think, to read, to study history, to ask questions. Africa needs to stand on their own thing instead of believing what was passed down to us through colonial rule. Africa needs to know their history more than they know religion. Because people that know where they came from are very much harder to control. Cut camera.